Coming up on America, why is the Pope going to Israel? Francis' latest surprise? That's next. So it seems that every day there's a new headline about Pope Francis making surprise phone calls, sneaking out of the Vatican at night, being Times Person of the Year.
But today there's a big announcement. He's going to visit the Middle East, Israel, the Palestinian territories, and Jordan, which is now home to hundreds of thousands of refugees from Syria. Here to talk with us about that is Vicenzino, the director of the Global Strategy Project. It was great to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. Marco, I was just telling you, I came back from Israel and Jordan and the Palestinian territories. Everything seems to be complicated over there. So the Pope is going there in May, and then what is he supposed to do?
I mean, first of all, if to look at it from the institution of the papacy, he's the leader of over 1 billion Catholics, the largest religion in the world. It's a reaffirmation of the presence of the papacy and the importance, particularly in the Holy Land, the birthplace of Christianity. So there's that symbolism in the institution itself. Secondly, there's the fact that the Christian minority within the region, within those areas, are constantly becoming less and less. Many are fleeing due to conflict and other political issues. And thirdly, also, is the fact that if you look at the region itself, the Palestinian-Israel issue, the war in Syria, instability in Lebanon, it's the way the Pope is reinvigorating and re-energizing this institution to become more diplomatically involved in these conflicts. It's not going to resolve them, but the effort and the input does have a lot of weight.
Does it, though? I mean, this is a conflict that has been going on now for decades. Does it really make a difference to have the Pope involved?
It's not going to have a fundamental, essential difference, but it does provide some, I don't say pressure, but it provides a lot of legitimacy to the importance of resolving that issue. The symbolism is enormous. It's not maybe so much as a direct diplomatic injection, but it's that participation, showing that they care for it, speaking about it, that reinvigorates the process and adds energy to the process being led, particularly by the United States, in this case by Secretary of State John Kerry.
So that's the point. Let's jump to Syria. It's a humanitarian crisis right now. Almost 2 million refugees so far, hundreds of thousands of people who have been injured or died. So do you think the Obama administration handled it correctly? That diplomacy was the way to do it and not a military option?
I have my criticisms about it. I think a lot more could have been done. Never boots on the ground. I would definitely discourage you against that.
More military, you mean?
It would have been more supplies and help to the opposition. I think they waited too long. In the summer of 2012, when the Kofi Annan's plan didn't work, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, CIA Director Petraeus, and many within the administration, even Panetta, when he was leaving the administration, constantly were telling him to increase engagement, to become more active, and he refused to do that. And I think many of the warning from his chief advisors now is playing itself out in a very negative way.
Right, and what we're seeing is a real humanitarian crisis. I want to look at some numbers. 1.84 million registered refugees, 5,000 people per day are leaving Syria, and there have been over 100,000 casualties since the civil war started 2 years ago. Is the international community failing Syria?
I don't say they're failing Syria. A lot more can be done to help the countries where the spillover is taking place. For example, if you look at Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, there's massive waves of refugees. 1/3 of the refugees are outside on the bordering countries. 2/3 are internally displaced. So there is a disaster, that humanitarian disaster, the largest since the Second World War. It's not just about the bordering countries, but within. I think a country like Lebanon, a lot more needs to be done. I mean, the Lebanese population is 3 to 4 million. Now about a quarter of the population are now refugees from Syria. So yes, the international community has to become a lot more engaged, give a lot more resources, and give a lot more support, particularly to the neighboring countries.
Now, let's talk about Iraq. Al-Qaeda is now controlling Fallujah. Obviously, U.S. troops are not anymore in Iraq. I remember Senator McCain said that we pulled out too fast, too quickly from Iraq. Is he right? I mean, should we have stayed over there longer?
In late 2011, this thing called Status of Forces Agreement. That's basically an agreement between the American government and the Iraqi government to give immunity to American soldiers. They couldn't work out in a deal. Since they didn't work out a deal, American troops could pulled out. The big debate is whether enough effort was put into creating that Status of Forces Agreement, and that's a debate. That aside, from a purely geopolitical perspective, I think at least 5,000 to 10,000 troops should have remained in the country. It would have been the best thing to do, not as getting directly involved, but advising and training training Iraqi forces and preventing these al-Qaeda elements from increasing.
But now that I see Iraq, I mean, what was the purpose of Iraq? Was that a mistake right from the beginning?
That's a historical question. Whether there's legal questions, cultural questions, political, it's enormous.
But Bush made a mistake, a huge mistake.
My bottom line was, if you have to go in, were you prepared for the day after when Baghdad fell? And they weren't prepared for it. So that's what, for me, that's the bottom line.
We have historic talks gearing up, Iran, United States. Can you just give us your quick take?
Yeah, there's a very brief, limited window of opportunity, no more than 6 months, so just a bit more. There's a lot of there's a new Iranian president, new rhetoric, new willingness that seems to be negotiating, but the bottom line is trust and verification and transparency. And if there is not that during the devil's in the detail, but if you don't have those three elements, this thing will result in nothing.
You think President Barack Obama's policy of emphasizing diplomacy and not military attacks, that's the right approach to the region?
Skillful diplomacy, that's a distinction, because diplomacy for the sake of diplomacy won't achieve anything. And so when you have pure hard power, pure military boots on the ground, the military efforts, that's not going to do anything. You need a combination of the two, but with a greater emphasis on skillful diplomacy. It has to be constantly engaged in a process that has to be constantly managed.
Is Kerry doing it better than Hillary?
He seems to have more energy, and he seems to be, I mean, Hillary was 4 years, and much of what she did was managing foreign policy, and she couldn't do as much as she wanted because she was limited. But in this case, I think Obama's situation is not as good as when he came into office. The fact is that Kerry has a lot more prestige overseas, and is using 30 years, more than 30 years of experience to inject a lot of energy into the diplomatic process.
Marco, thanks so much.
Thank you
so much for talking to us. There's more ahead. Stay with us. Thank you.